Welcome to Fearless Females, where ambition meets resilience. Meet your guide, Lorie Jones, owner of Fearless Financial Advisors. Join her and remarkable women executives as they uncover the triumphs and transformative moments shaping extraordinary careers. Ready to be fearless? Let the journey begin.
Good morning, Fearless Females. I'm so excited you decided to join us today. And we like to thank our Fearless Financial Advisors for sponsoring our podcast, and the website is actually up. So go check it out. I'm super excited about it. So today we're talking with Dr. Mary Papazian. And the thing that I found most interesting about her story is just how unexpected her path was. You know, I'm the type of person that really likes to set goals, and I've got my spreadsheets, and there is nothing that is a surprise in my life if I have any control over it at all. And Dr. Mary, as I was chatting with her, she just talked about going to a literature class on Milton's Paradise Lost. And she thought she was headed to law school with a structured plan. And it changed her life. She ended up in higher education and ultimately becoming a university president and a leader in shaping academia. And none of that would have happened if she had stuck rigidly to her plan, if she had followed her spreadsheet, if she'd had her 10-year plan mapped out, and she wasn't willing to be open to some of those opportunities. So I really think that although I'm not willing to cut the ties on my spreadsheet, I really do think that I need to be more open with things that cross my path and opportunities that come up. I am so excited for you to hear this conversation. Let's get started. Good morning. We are here today with Dr. Mary Papazian. She is, and I'm going to get this title right, she is the Executive Vice President of the Association of Governing Boards for Universities and Colleges. Did I do it good, Mary?
Yep, sounds right to me.
Perfect. Well, let's get started. I'm so excited to hear your story. And the very first question I ask will probably be one that you like because you're in education and it's about books. I'm a reader. I love any and all suggestions. What is your favorite book?
What is my favorite book? You're talking to a literature professor. So that's a dangerous, dangerous question. I'm going to answer it, if I might, with multiple examples. All right. So I'm going to take myself back to my childhood when we used to go to the library and, pick up 10 books or whatever the library allowed us. And then we always had the scholastic fairs where you could buy as many books, for $1 or whatever it was. So I must have picked up a book in fourth grade, and it was called Snow Treasure. I read that book once a year for years. And it's an amazing book. And I say this because there's a theme that you'll discover in some of my favorites. It was a historical novel. In this case, it was focused on children during the Second World War and the Nazi occupation, and how they developed a plan to sort of save the country and its gold. It was an amazing story with adventure and history and courage and all of that. And so I found it after my kids were young, and I ordered it for them. They weren't quite as taken with it as I was, but maybe it's just the generations. But my all-time favorite, I would say, is, it's going to sound very grand, War and Peace, which is an extraordinary novel. I think it's one of the greatest ever written. Again, a historical novel set in Napoleonic times with all of the great themes of literature: love and courage and suffering and war and, all of those kinds of things. And so that's pretty extraordinary. More recently, I read a book that I wanted to share with you because it's a little bit more American history-like. And I think it really tells a story of 5 generations. I think it's 4 or 5 generations of women in Louisiana. And it's one a lot of people don't know about. It's called Cane River. The cane is after the sugar cane. And, 5 generations of women who go through the different stages of life, particularly for women of color in the United States, really moving, relationships that are multi-generational and just beautifully written. And I can't stop but by saying that I think the greatest piece of literature in English is Milton's Paradise Lost. And I say that because it's what got me to graduate school. Was just it's an extraordinary piece. So those are some, and I have more books in my library than I know what to do with, and nobody wants them anymore. So it's one of the challenging tasks I have ahead of me is to figure out what to do with all of them.
Yeah, I can imagine. I actually have a pretty extensive library myself, and I love all sorts of books. So you're preaching to the choir here. So Mary, tell me a little bit about your journey. How did you get where you're at today? What do you do? Just talk a little bit about you.
Yeah, well, I mean, thank you for that. We all love to talk about ourselves, I think, a little bit, but I'm with the Association of Governing Boards now, so I work with governing boards across universities and colleges across the United States. I spent my entire career in higher education, and I think it comes, from my childhood. My mother was a teacher. She taught English and history at a small, private Armenian school that we all attended. And I always knew I wanted to do that I wanted to, study literature. I didn't want to be a high school teacher like she was, though. That just seemed like a lot of work. And I was thinking of going to law school, and I thought about the difference between, studying, legal language and torts or studying Paradise Lost. I really fell in love with it when I took a required course that I didn't think I'd like. And that led me to graduate school in English. I completed that. And then I took my first job at a university in Michigan. So I made a move from Southern California and the sunshine of Southern California to the winters of Southeastern Michigan. And it was, when you're looking to start a career and there aren't a lot of jobs, you're grateful to be there. And it was a really wonderful place to be. I was at Oakland University and really had great colleagues. And that started my career in higher education. And so I was a faculty member for about 11 years. And then I was encouraged to apply for the associate dean job for the associate dean of the College of Arts and Sciences. And I was appointed to that role. I did it for about 5 years. And that sort of set my academic administrative career going. And I became a dean, a provost, which is a chief academic officer of a university. And then I was president, actually, of 2 universities, Southern Connecticut State University in New Haven, and then president of San Jose State University here in Silicon Valley. So did that for altogether, about 10 years as president in both places. And then retired from that, and then a year later started here at AGB. So it's been a good career.
Yeah, that sounds like you like bopped around, like East Coast, West Coast, like you were just adventurous there.
Well, it's kind of the nature of higher education, I have to be honest. You go where the jobs are. And I was really, really fortunate. I was able to, find good jobs, and really the only one I really applied for and was searching for was the dean job. After that, I was nominated for positions, and it was just it was much more of a natural progression. But it was great. I worked in Michigan and New Jersey and New York and Connecticut, back in California. So all really interesting communities, and you see what different in different parts of America, but you also see the threads that bind us all together.
Yeah, that's an interesting observation. And I probably focus on the differences, how each unique region has its flavors, but I bet you do get to see the similarities as well. You started out teaching and then you went into provost administration. When did you make that change and why did you decide to do that?
Well, I hadn't planned on it, though I will say when I was in graduate school, my advisor, when we're finishing in our last year, completing our dissertations and we're looking for academic positions, our advisors write, their reference letters, and they talk about, how important our scholarship is and what wonderful teachers and colleagues we're going to be. It's all a little bit formulaic, honestly. And he did all of that. But then at the very bottom, he said, and by the way, she'll be a university president in 25 years. I asked him why he was putting that in there. And he said, because it's true. But make sure you get tenure first, which is in academic terms. That's a big achievement to be tenured at a university. You go through a very serious review at multiple levels by peers and colleagues. And it gives you a kind of security at the university. So I had done all of that. And our university was going through its 10-year accreditation review. So, one of the real characteristics of American higher education is this peer review and continuous improvement, this commitment to improvement. And so, accreditation is really about continuous improvement and accountability. And every university that wants to get federal financial aid for its students has to be accredited by one of the 6 regional accrediting bodies. And there's this huge process, standards you have to meet. You put together a very large report with lots of data, lots of backup files, the whole thing. And so our associate provost was driving that initiative, and they asked me to come and join her in that effort and then edit the report. You have many different people writing different parts of it. So my job was to make it sound like a coherent narrative, a story of the university. And the process of doing that introduces you, it introduced me anyway, to everybody on campus. It didn't matter if they were in an academic position, a non-academic position. They could be, the athletic director, the head of facilities, the chief of police, you name it, the chief financial officer, and everything in between. And so at that point, the dean of arts and sciences said, everybody here. I really could use you in the college office. So are you interested in becoming an associate dean? And I said, well, maybe this is a good time to do it. So I did that. And I found out I was good at it. People thought I was good at it and I liked it. So that led me down that administrative path.
That's cool. I love the idea too. And I know that colleges and universities are good at this, but like that constant improvement, continued learning. And it seems like you've embraced that in your life as well. Like, constantly trying new things, living new places, and making changes in what you do and what you know.
I always tell this to students and to young people all the time, and to colleagues, younger colleagues. You don't always know what's going to come next, but what you can do is always be curious and always be willing to learn. We all have new things to learn because the world is changing all around us. And so, I've had a career in higher education for over 35 years, but I did many different jobs with different responsibilities in different places and different priorities. And that keeps it interesting. And I think it's part of the fun of the whole thing.
So, Mary, tell me a little bit about the best investment you made in yourself. Can you look back over your journey, your career, and say, oh my goodness, I'm so glad I did that, because if I didn't, I wouldn't be where I'm at today?
Yeah, I can think of a couple of things. Well, when I was associate dean, I knew that if I wanted to become a dean, I needed to be at the rank, what they call a full professor. There's a assistant professor, associate professor, full professor. And that meant I needed some time to complete some research projects. And I had a book manuscript I had to finish. I had a contract for it. And I said, I can't really do that while I'm working this job every day. And so I needed to have some time to be able to do that work. And most people would have left that position and gone back to the faculty and done it and then tried to go back into an administrative role. What I did instead was say to the dean, I could go back to the faculty and do this, or if you would prefer that I continue to work with the college, then why don't you give me an 8-month research leave, like a research sabbatical, and I'll complete all of this and then I'll come back. Nobody had ever gotten something like that before, but I learned that if you want something, you just let them say no. You have to ask. And I did. And he recognized that in his mind, it was more important to have me come back and to stay than to go back to the faculty. So he gave me that research leave. I was able to complete the book, and that allowed me to be reviewed for full professorship. And once that happened, then I could be hired in a dean's job. And then that enabled the rest of my career.
That's kind of cool. And you're right. Like the only thing they can tell you is no. And then you'd be right back where you were at. So why not try?
The other thing I would say I always did as well, and I think it's important, is, and I say this to my team as well, I really came to believe how important it was to fully use your vacations and to protect some of your own time. That it's really easy to get caught up in the work. And if you do that, you end up burning out. So I wouldn't answer emails late at night. I wouldn't answer them during the weekends because if I did, then other people felt they had to as well.
Mhm.
If we had a real crisis, then that's a different matter. But most of the things we think are crises are really not. I say they're not crises; they're problems to be solved, and waiting another day and thinking on it might actually create a better solution. So it's just a habit of mind I developed, and I think it helps because burnout can be in any job, whether it's this or any other, high level job, can happen if we're not careful.
Yeah. And I think we'll get down to this question a little bit later about unique challenges of women, but I do think that's a unique challenge of women. We want to, give and give and give. And a lot of times we burn out. And so I love that you learned that early and set those boundaries early. I'm learning that lesson a little bit later and trying to set those boundaries. So I could have used that advice probably 20 years ago. So tell me a little bit.
Well, advice is cheap, as they say. It's not always easy to do, but I tried.
Tell me a little bit about, speaking of advice, tell me a little bit about, did you ever get some really bad advice, or what is the worst advice you've ever gotten? And did you take it?
Well, I tried to not to take bad advice, and I was really fortunate. I have to be honest. I had some really good mentors and some wise people around me. And so when I heard something that didn't make sense, I was trying to reflect on whether I really got any that I listened to. And honestly, I would just factor them out. I really identified who I thought was, had something to offer. And there were some really amazing people who did. So I got a lot of great advice, but in terms of the bad advice, I really have put it out of my mind if I had it
Mhm.
because I just decided it wasn't worth following. I had a pretty good sort of radar for what made sense and what didn't.
Mhm.
And most of the bad advice, by the way, is unsolicited. And you just say, I don't really need this. I think it's really important, by the way, to identify people who you can trust
Mhm.
and whose advice you actually can count on. But at the same time, you have to run it all through your own value system and your own sort of personality, what's comfortable for you, because some people are comfortable doing certain things that other people aren't.
Yeah. Yeah. It is really important too to remember, even if you've got those people that give really good advice and are great mentors, that you probably know your life and your career better than anyone else. And so if it's not, it may be right for them, but it might not be right for you.
Right. Exactly.
So, what about looking back along your journey? Have you had any situations that you're like, oh my goodness, I wish I could go back and do that again? I would do it so much differently the next time because I know, you've learned and so you get to take today's knowledge and go back to a situation. Can you think of something like that?
Yeah, I could think of a couple of different kinds of examples. So I'll give you two different ones. The first one is I do think you always have to in every experience you have to reflect on what worked well and what might not have worked so well and what you can learn from it. I mean, that's what ongoing learning means. And I'll remember the first time I was interviewed for a presidency. It was a little earlier in my career than I thought. Somebody had encouraged me to do it, and they said, you may or may not get it, but it will be good experience. You'll learn because you're going to go through one of these and be successful soon anyway.
Mhm.
And so I said, okay. And it turned out they wanted to interview me. So we have these. I was a semifinalist for the position, and I'll never forget it. And I realized I went in there and I had thought through all the questions I thought I would get. I had pretty good sense of that. There's only so many questions. Most of them are very similar. And I was just trying to show them that I could be their president. And I realized afterward that I was really trying to show myself that I could. So I would talk and anticipate the questions and didn't really let them all ask their own questions. And, it was really more my trying to persuade myself. And what I learned from that as I thought about it is that I think it's the worst interview have ever given, actually. And I said, why was it so bad? And I said, that's the problem. I was trying to persuade myself that you have to go in believing that you're already in the position and representing yourself as if you were. And I changed the way I did things, and that led me to much different outcomes down the line. So that was a positive learning lesson, and I wasn't really disappointed because it was probably too soon for me to be in that position anyway. So it was a good experience, and I learned what I needed from it. Some of the harder things, though, is when you're in these positions of real responsibility, sometimes you have to do things that are really hard because you have to think about what's in the best interests of the organization, of the business. If you're a business person and you're a CEO or a manager, a high-level manager, or the university. And sometimes that means that you have to make changes of personnel. And they could be people you care a lot about and you really like personally, and you even think of as a friend. And I've had to do that more than once because it was either not the right fit, it turned out, or there were some other issues and the university needed a change. And as the leader, I had the obligation to do that. That's really, really hard. And it comes at a cost. And you often, you can lose friends because of that. But you have to realize that when you're in a leadership role, it's not about you. It's about the organization that you serve. And so a lot of lessons there. As I reflect back on it, I don't know if I could have done it easier, or I don't think it was possible maybe to do it easier. It was going to be painful. But you try to do things so that everybody involved can at least go out with some grace and save face. And so that was something I always tried to do in those difficult moments.
I've often wondered, because I have a really strong team concept, and we do know, we know each other's kids, we know each other's families and stuff like that. But there are situations where, as a leader and a business owner, you have to let people that you're friends with go. Did you find any way to make it different, or to do it different? Or maybe the question is, and you can answer whichever one you want, like, would you still make friends with them and still be in that close relationship, even though you might have to fire them one day?
It's a hard one. It was the right thing to do, and I don't know if it could have been done differently, but it came at a personal cost, and there's no question about it. And I don't think I think when friendships come where friendships are, I think that's okay. What I do find is that when you are the leader, you probably are going to have, and I know that this happened for me in my presidencies, and many of us as presidents of universities, we all know each other. We get together because we are worried about that. You can't really have those kind of friendships, or you have to separate the two. But we can have friendships with each other as colleagues, right? As colleague presidents, and be supportive of each other and for each other. We understand better than anyone the kinds of pressures that we're under and the challenges that we're facing. But it can happen, though, that you're in a position where you do have that relationship with someone, and it can be very enriching in your life. But, it's always sad when something like that was something that mattered a lot to you, comes to an end. And it's part of the difficulties of being a leader, but you have to do it. I mean, I think you just have to accept that as part of your responsibility.
I was actually hoping for a magic answer. Mary, I was hoping for more.
There's no magic in it. Yeah. I mean, I would just say this, that I do think it's important in all situations, to think about how, if you have to do something difficult, how can you do it in a way that's kind, even when it's going to be difficult. And I think it's important to remember that these are people and they have feelings, and they're not going to like you for it. They're not necessarily. They're not going to. You don't look for forgiveness. I mean, you've done something that's going to be have a real impact for them. And they may have grace later on and forgive you, but you can't. You just have to understand what the costs are, but do it for the right reasons, and do it, as I said, as gracefully as you can under the circumstance. And it does work out, but these are difficult kinds of experiences. I think women tend to be more sensitive to that, perhaps, than men. Though I have known some men who are very sensitive to it. So I hate to generalize too much.
In a generalist, yeah. Yeah, that is interesting, and I do like the idea of being, remembering that you're do it with kindness, do as much as you can with kindness, and try and put yourself in the other people's, in their shoes, but it is hard. That's the cold, hard truth of being a leader is, it comes with hard responsibilities sometimes. Mary, what is one thing, if you could go back and talk to yourself more at the beginning of your journey, what is one thing you would tell your 20, 21-year-old, 22-year-old self?
I think when we're young, we're very confident of that we know everything. And at least I think I was probably a little bit that way. And you learn humility in life. Life teaches you humility, which I think is a very enriching thing. I like that about where I am now. You don't have to know everything, and you can feel very confident about it. I think when you're younger, you feel like you have to at least show that you know everything, even if you don't. And I would want to say, relax, take a deep breath. It's okay not to know, just try to learn what you can, and be as authentic a self as you can be, because at the end of the day, it's far more rewarding. And then the other thing I would say, and I do think some of the young people today get this in ways that perhaps we didn't in our era, that life isn't all about work, right? It's not. Our identity certainly isn't about our roles.
Mhm.
If you make your identity about your role, then you're in for I think a real surprise, because you can't always be in that role. And that can be very hard when you're no longer in the role. But if your identity is your identity, and then you have this work you do, and you care about the mission or the purpose or what have you, that can be very rewarding. But your identity isn't. One day you'll leave, you'll retire, you'll move on, whatever it might be. You have to know who you are. And so I think when we're younger, we don't always reflect in that way. Though, as I said, I have kids who are, in their early 30s and their mid 20s, and there's a lot more self reflection than I think we had when we were that age, to be honest.
Yeah, I do. I love this new generation. They do put some boundaries around their time and energy and kind of spend some time thinking about what's important to them. Like you just work really, really, really hard until you make a lot of money, and that was the way we did it. But they are choosing sometimes to make trade-offs between they still work really hard. They just may take less money for a little bit more time building relationships or something like that. So I find that fascinating and interesting, and I love to see where it goes.
The other thing I would encourage young people to do as well is to get to know people of all kinds. Um, Not just the people who might be in your friend group, your kind of work group, or your experience, or from your college, or whatever it might be. That there's a real richness in getting to know people at all levels. And certainly when you're in work, I know for me, I enjoyed and learned a great deal from the people who kept our campus beautiful. I mean, they cared, they understood how it mattered for students to be in a place that was beautiful, and they worked really hard to make that happen. And there's a great perspective that people from all these roles have. And I think I would just encourage young people as they move through to keep their ears open to those different voices.
That's good advice. And it goes back to your idea of kind of being curious, staying curious.
Life would be very boring if you weren't curious. I don't understand that. I mean, I could, I find that's what's fun about it, right? Learning new things. I find this new age fascinating, this new digital age with all of these new tools and AI and everything else. I mean, the kids get it more than I do, but boy, there's a lot for all of us to learn, and we should embrace it.
Yeah, I love it. I love that. What scared you the most when you first started out on your journey? And does it still scare you today, or did you learn to live it with it?
I for whatever reason, I was a fairly confident person when I was young. Not exactly sure where that came from. So I wasn't afraid. But I will say that when you're a young academic in a new position, we all wonder, are we going to get tenure? First, we wonder if we're going to get a job. And then we wonder if we're going to get tenure, because that's just such a difficult process in so many institutions. And there's a lot of pressure on you. But what I learned is that you can't worry about those things. What you have to do is just put your head down and do the work. And when you do the work, good things happen. Right. And I remember saying when I was a dean and reviewing files for new professors who we had hired, and I would say, don't worry about the politics, don't worry about the games, just focus on doing the work, focus on, doing the best you can in the classroom. With your students, focus on really bringing your scholarly work to completion, and make sure your voice is heard in the profession. Think about how you could be a good colleague. I said, if you do all of those things, everything else will fall into place, because it'll be there, but if you focus on the work, on the mission. And that was something that don't spend the time being scared. In other words, just spend the time, focus on the things you're there to do, and the rest has a way of falling into place.
Yeah, I like that. I like that. Does it get easier when you get tenure where you're like not, because you're not scared?
It does, actually, because you're not going to be out of a job tomorrow, right? You're not going to be out of the profession. And once you don't get, for faculty who don't get tenure, it's really hard to get another position like that. It can happen, but it's a very difficult one, and it's very hard, I think, also emotionally, because it feels like a real rejection. And so I was in a position where I had to make assessments and actually, recommend against people and deny people that. And I used to say all the time, that's the hardest decision to make, because you know that it's going to have a profound impact on that person's life.
Mhm.
So you have to do it really thoughtfully and really carefully, and give them every chance to, to prove that they've met the standards. But at the end of the day, we had standards that we had to meet, and that was important too. So, it's a tough process, and I know it's under many faculty are nervous until they get to that point. And I wish we had a different system where that didn't have to be quite like that.
Yeah. But on the other hand, I guess once they do get tenure, if, they get tenure, like you don't have to worry about losing your job at 55 or 60 or something along those lines.
Yeah, and you do feel much freer to be able to pursue the things you want to pursue, and if your interests change. And I had many colleagues who started out in one area of study, and I had one, actually, the chair of the department who hired me, who started out as an 18th century literature scholar and ended up moving into film, and really moved fully into film studies and completely changed his direction. And you can do those things when you have that kind of security. Look, it's a privilege. There's no question about it. And but it's a path to get there. So you do pay a price in getting to that point.
That's so interesting. I never thought about the kind of freedom that you would have to kind of think and just be. Like we're always producing and trying to, I don't know, just check whatever check marks or boxes we have. But having the security to be able to dream and think, that's cool. That's really awesome.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it does. And honestly, faculty at that point make huge contributions to their institutions, and they start to serve in different ways. And they have deep experience and great wisdom in many cases. And so they're really important voices,
and I think
to have on a campus.
Yeah, huge important contributions to the world as a whole too. Time to really make a difference. That's cool. I think that's really neat. I didn't even think of that before, but I think that's really neat.
Yeah.
Tell me did you face any unique challenges because you were a woman?
I think early in my career, no. I actually don't think it had an impact one way or another. I think that wasn't a factor. But as I moved up in terms of my roles and responsibilities, then I started to see it creep in. And I think for women, there's particularly in the senior leadership positions, and certainly as president, everybody's watching you. You have to be gracious. You have to look a certain way. You have to dress a certain way. Your women are brought in to solve crises, but they're not always given and I think it's true in the business world too. I think you see it a lot. Women will be hired into really difficult roles because there's a crisis to be solved. Women tend to be better collaborators. They often bring more empathy to the table. They will create partnerships and they get stuff done and turn things around. But you burn out, and you sometimes have to make hard decisions, and not everybody's happy, and they're not given the same often support and grace when they've done some difficult things that you'll see sometimes for men. So I've seen it as a pattern, honestly, in higher education leadership. I certainly have experienced some of that, and everybody I know has. I mean, it's pretty common. And so as we think about, and I would say it's not just for women, it's also for people of color who similarly will face some of that. And so trying to really talk through it and to be a support system for each other, and to recognize what some of those expectations are, or some of the assumptions that are there, I think is going to be really important. You still have, and I know you have this in the business world, and what does a leader look like? If a man is strong and loud, he's a leader because he's strong, right? If it's a woman, she's shrill and harsh and intimidating, right? So it's, we still see all of that, and it can be a challenge. And certainly I've had my share of it.
Hopefully that next generation will fix that problem too for us.
Yeah, we're all relying on them. So we just need to let them kind of move into these roles and step out of the way, right? And go enjoy the rest of our lives.
Yeah. Mary, what is the thing you are the most proud of?
I'm proud of, really my whole career. I think at each stage, and one of the things, pieces of advice I like to give, and I remind myself of it too, by the way, I like to give it to myself, is how important it is to be in the moment, in the present. We're often thinking about the past and what we did or didn't do, or the future and where we're going and what we want and how to get there. But the past hasn't happened yet, has already happened, and the future is still to come. And the only thing you really have is the present. And so you have to think every day about, what can you do today to, make things a little bit better, to move the agenda forward, to support and empower other people, whatever it might be. And I feel really good to have been in positions where I could make a positive difference. And I've gotten great feedback from folks, from places I've been, who say, you really changed what we're doing here. You really gave us hope. You gave us a sense of the future. And for me, that means a lot, because if you can empower others, then they'll take it on and they'll do even greater things. And it's a great, and has been a very rewarding career.
Yeah, that's great. I love that. And it sounds too, I love people who love what they do. And it sounds like you have just enjoyed, maybe not every single solitary second, but you really have enjoyed what you do.
Yeah. And I say this to folks too. I mean, it's a very funny moment, by the way. I should say that for the first part of my career, I was always looking up to mentors. And then suddenly people are coming to me for mentorship. And there's some point in your life when you transition from being the one seeking to the one giving. And I still remember kind of when that happened. And it's pretty powerful when it does. But one of the things I say to people, you're not going to love every day. There's a lot of hard things in leadership positions, and in work that is meaningful and that can make a difference. There's going to be hard things, but fundamentally, you need to enjoy it. You need to be able to find the joy in it. And yes, you may read some of the headlines. Who wants to be a college president today? They're on the hot seat. There's too many challenges. They're stressed from all sides. The job has never been harder. And there's a lot of truth to all of that. But if you don't find the fundamental joy, and for me, it always came on graduation day, on commencement, when I would see at the institutions where I worked and led, we had a lot of first generation students, a lot of students who were, really representing the hopes and dreams of their families. And when you see them cross the stage and the joy that they have, knowing that they've accomplished something and it's something that's going to change the trajectory of their lives, there's nothing more rewarding than that. And it gives you a sense of fulfillment and purpose, and all the hard stuff goes away when you see that.
Oh, I love it. Yeah. Yeah. It's a little bit the same for a mom as she watches her kids, reach graduation day or go out into the world and stuff like that. So I can see that would be really fulfilling. Any advice for a young lady who's just starting down the path that you are already so successful at? If she wants to be you when she grows up, you have any advice for her?
First, I'd say don't try to be me. I'd say be you. Be the best version of you that you can be. Don't compare yourself to others. I have never, and I give this advice to my kids, my daughter, all the time. Comparisons, and I think it's hard today with all the social media and everything else. It's constant comparisons. But, just measure yourself against the better you that you want to build. And it's not in comparison to someone else. It's how you feel and what you're able to do. And so I would say first, that's number one. The other piece of advice I'd give is that be open to surprise pathways that may open up for you. When we're young, we want to have plans and we want to know what the steps are and how we're going to get there. Life is not linear. The most interesting things happen when you least expect them. And if you're so caught up on the linear path that of what it's supposed to be, you're going to miss all the interesting things in life. And you will probably miss the most interesting path that you might have taken because your eyes had blinders on them. So I would say, sure, have a general plan. That's fine. It's good to have goals that you work toward, but don't make it rigid. And, somebody once told me, a piece of advice I got that was really good advice is opportunity comes when it comes, not when you plan it to come. And so sometimes you move into something sooner than you would have expected because the opportunity is there. There's a job opening that looks just exactly right. It means making a change, but you really wanted to do these other things first. Well, you know what? Sometimes you just leap and you take it because it's there, because in a year or two, it's not going to be there. And something else will. And so I think it's good to just be, it's kind of, life is a little bit of an art and science, right? And you have to be open to the art side of it.
Yeah, I like that. I like that idea. That's great advice. Thank you so much, Mary, for being with us and sharing your experience. I really appreciate it. If I have a young lady who's listening who wants to get in touch with you and ask a few more questions or get some of your advice, how does she get in touch with you?
Yeah, absolutely. And they can always find me on LinkedIn. So I'm there.
Perfect. Well, I really appreciate your time today. Thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure. And thanks for the conversation.